So we get some exit polls out here. They finally got published. People want to look at this number here, which is the margin discrepancy in favor of Trump. I think that's worthwhile, but it's important. One of the things you want to look at, or specifically the discrepancy greater than the exit poll margin of error. It's not. You also need to look at the distance, right? So if the polls have, like in North Carolina and Florida, the distance between what the exit polls were 2% and 1.4% in North Carolina and Florida. The outcome was 4 and 1.3. So you can look at it and say, well, the margin, the difference is 6% in North Carolina. That's a lot, right? But the exit polls only had 2%. So yeah, the results in North Carolina were 2%, or had Clinton winning 2% in the exit poll. But that 2% is less than the margin of error, right? So even if there was a little bit of voter fraud in North Carolina, it's just the difference between the reported vote count may be great, but that's not. That's just gravy on it, right? That argument would be okay. Maybe they went overboard, right, in the cheating sort of thing, and that itself may be used as an argument that the results are suspect. But it's not as convincing, right? Because there's going to be a margin on the other side too, right? So, and I'm eyeballing this, right? I'm not crunching anything. It's just conceivable, okay, that you could do the recount in North Carolina and then find out that Trump won by 100,000 votes. Or that number was too high. I made up a number that was too high. You find that Trump wins by 3,000 votes in the end, right? That's not impossible, right? Even, he could have cheated in a state that he won anyways, right? So it's the North Carolina thing. I'm not saying that the numbers make North Carolina look not fishy. I'm just saying that it's not it's not as obvious. That 2% win, so that the 2% lead in the exit polls doesn't translate into a clear message of voter fraud. It doesn't. Okay? And it's the same thing in Florida. It's 1.4%. There's a margin of error on a 3%. It's like, yeah, that's not even a big difference. That's not even one of the bigger differences, right? That's okay. That's error. That's what that is. Okay. Oh no, that's a margin. I guess it's a small sample in Kentucky. Okay. Oh no, wait, that's not okay. My apologies. It's just the margin there. That's not the error. Yeah, that's the discrepancy. Okay, so I was looking at the wrong at the wrong column. So 2% margin on the exit polls, and a 6% difference, right? So you look at, you say, gee, 6% is big, right? But there's enough of a margin of error here that okay, maybe they're, you know, you can take that 6 down, even if the actual distance is 4 or 3.5 the other way. Trump still wins the state, right? And it's the same thing in Florida. You know, I mean, 2.6 is not that big. Really, it's not. That's reasonable. But I mean, the 1.4, that's half of the margin of error. That's not if Florida's not an argument at all. I'm not saying he didn't steal Florida. I'm saying that like you can take Florida and take it off the list. There's no evidence based on exit polling. Anyways, there's no evidence that there was any cheating in Florida. Not based on exit polls. North Carolina is a little bit more fishy because the difference is so big, right? What it suggests in North Carolina is more along the lines of that they overcompensated. I may even be willing to suggest that Trump may have thought Florida was lost and may not have bothered cheating in Florida because those numbers are more indicative of a lack of cheating than they are of cheating, right? It's in the margin of error. But I mean, again, I'm not saying he didn't cheat in Florida, right? I mean, like, listen to my conversation here. I'm not saying that the president didn't steal the state, right? But like, there's no actionable evidence here, okay? North Carolina, like Florida, there's no actionable evidence at all. It's entirely consistent. North Carolina, it's not actionable. Maybe it seems it's a little extreme, but it's not actionable, right? Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. You know, the funny thing is Michigan is, the exit polls were also pretty close in Michigan. Might Michigan have voted for Trump in the end? If there's a way out, it's Michigan, right? But I think that looking at this with Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, okay, the exit polls had Clinton win Pennsylvania by more than 4 points with a 4% margin of difference, or sorry, margin of error. It's not way outside the margin, okay, but it's enough that you should see some, that's a red flag in Pennsylvania. Wisconsin, that's a 3.9%. It's 3.5% margin of error. Right? That's a red flag as well, right? And they're moving in the opposite directions. So that's big, and that's, again, it doesn't prove anything, but it certainly is a red flag. What did I say here? What I said was that exit polling has a margin of error like every other type of polling, but I do think that there's a strong argument from this chart that there may have been suppression in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, neither of which were considered in play by any credible source, right? So you look at all of the pre-election polling, and it's consistent with the exit polls, right? But when you look at the reported vote count, it's different, substantially, in a way that suggests, and I think pretty strongly suggests, that there were a substantial number of people that showed up in these states and voted, but that those votes were not counted. Now again, if you look at the totality of the information in front of us, Trump's voting levels did not decrease. Did not increase. Okay, so we are not seeing a situation where it looks like votes were flipped, right? So I mean, a lot of the conspiracy theories will say things like people showed up at the voting machine and they said they're going to vote for Clinton, but instead of voting for Clinton, they voted for Trump. I don't think that that's what happened. At no point have I ever suggested that. I'm not proposing that. In fact, I think that if you look at the numbers, the numbers pretty clearly rule that out because Trump's numbers did not increase. If you would have, in fact, I believe that Trump had less votes than Romney in the end. So we're not seeing an increase in votes for Trump. If you had seen all of a sudden, Trump's vote count is higher than Romney's, or higher than any predictions, then. But it seems like he more or less held his base, and that's not. I mean, I'm very surprised that he did as well with white women as he apparently did, but again, that's how it's been going for decades, is that white women vote the same way that their husbands do, or married white women vote the same way that their husbands do. It's very, very clear, right? And that trend held in an election where all logic suggested it shouldn't have, it did. In the official tally, anyways. What you do see is you see apparently millions of votes for Clinton that don't appear to have been counted. And this exit polling data is consistent with that observation. If you say, okay, according to the exit polls, she won Pennsylvania by whatever margin, but then all of these people, probably mostly black people, that show up to vote, if you just don't count their votes, then you end up with Trump winning the state. And you end up with the strange result that Clinton's vote totals went down by a lot. And again, I think it's very important to point out that nobody thought Pennsylvania was in play, nobody thought Wisconsin was in play, and according to the exit polls, they weren't in play. There was a headline about not jumping to the conclusion that Paul Ryan won Trump the election. Okay. But considering that a lot of it's the state that's in charge of doing the vote counting, ultimately. I think maybe Scott Walker may have had something to do with that. Now, again, frustratingly, this data is not available. It's not there in Michigan, right? If you want to be consistent, we don't have the same kind of information about Michigan. There is a possibility that I mean, again, I'm saying there was a possibility that the vote wasn't rigged in Michigan. The information is not as strong there. It's not as the data's not as clear. I cannot stand up and tell you that I'm not as unwilling to believe Michigan because the data's lining up. But I mean, there are anomalies, right? You know, they say that 90,000 voters in Michigan that apparently undervoted. Right? So they show up and they vote for everything except the president. Well, I believe in the end that the total in Michigan was about 10,000 votes. That is fishy, and that should be investigated. It's also the case that the exit polls are not at all in line with polling regarding Latino voters. I'm gonna let the Latino pollster here make his case. It's there. But I mean, listen, I told you that all you had to do was watch CNN to see this. Okay, if you could watch and accept the media, if you could take the media in critically, you could see that it was pro-Trump. Okay, the media was clearly pro-Trump. And if you didn't see that, I don't know if you didn't want to see it or what, but it was obvious. And they broadcast that it was being stolen. They broadcast it in their polling. They broadcast it in their coverage. They knew what was happening. Trump knew what was happening. The media knew what was happening. The military and intelligence services knew what was happening. And I doubt I'm the only pundit that knew what was happening too. Besides the Alex Jones bit, I haven't seen anybody else point it out, but I'm sure I'm not the only person that saw it coming. Seems like the only people that couldn't figure it out were investors. Or at least, See, investors aren't, there's no centralized investor committee, right? They communicate. I mean, it's a disparate group of random scattered people who are largely competing against each other, right? Stuff like this, you don't really want to look to the market to guess it. The market's going to be the last people to figure it out, right? Because that's not. I mean, when we talk about big investors, right? Like investment bankers, okay, they're a part of the establishment, but the market itself is just people, right? The establishment doesn't live on Wall Street. It lives on Pennsylvania Avenue, right? It's the Pentagon. The establishment is the Pentagon. It's the CIA. That's the establishment. And they have offices on Wall Street. And they have contacts on Wall Street, but they are not Wall Street itself. Let's keep that in order in our minds here as to what the deep state is and where the power really lies in the country. It's in the military, and it's in the intelligence services. And they broadcast through the media. And again, I told you before it happened that I saw it coming. I don't think I'm that smart. I think maybe a lot of people just didn't want to see it coming.